legal editor. And Ken, some news tonight. Bill Barr, the Attorney General of the United States, says he's opening or deepening an investigation into allegations of voter fraud, although it doesn't seem like there's any indications yet that there's evidence. What do you make of it, and where does this go?
You know, I just heard the news myself right before I came on air here tonight, and I actually think from a pure legal perspective, it's completely justified for there to be an investigation into voter fraud. I just authored an article that was published yesterday, and you've got numerous different types and counts of voter fraud. I'm just going to check out my own article here. You know, you got mail-in ballots and massive bulk numbers that suddenly just arose with no indication of their origins. You've got mail-in ballots that at certain points, Democrat officials have announced that there are way more than they originally thought. Mail-in ballots in huge batches that somehow all go to one candidate. We've heard about that 138,000 in Michigan. I know it's being debunked by some press ends, but hey, you've got another one where there's 25,000. That's statistically impossible. Mail-in ballots en masse where Republican poll watchers have been disallowed from overseeing them. Mail-in ballots with unverifiable signatures. Mail-in ballots with no postmarks or with indiscernible postmarks. So give me a second on this. Mail-in ballots in great numbers from deceased people or people who moved out of state en masse. Mail-in ballots in large batches that are attributed to the wrong candidate by faulty software. Mail-in ballots in significant groups that arrive after Election Day. Mail-in ballots in monstrous figures that are fraudulent in their face because they're missing a necessary watermark. Let's talk about that one later, hopefully. And mail-in ballots in such giant amounts that they've triggered a state's voter turnout to appear either greater than the actual number of registered voters or eerily similar. Mail-in ballots in huge, incalculable numbers where it can't be determined where they came from. Once these ballots have arrived in these big batches, and you put them into the mix, you never know where they came from. I mean, David, you add all these things up, all these factual matters. I'm going to say potential factual matters. That evidence is gigantic that if it's true, this election can be overturned.
What about the argument, though? The pushback has been that let's just for argument's sake, let's just assume, okay, fine, you know, there was some sort of fraud. Well, why wouldn't that fraud then show up on the Senate races and the House races?
Who says that it hasn't? I mean, there's numbers,
because if you look at the number of ballots, I mean, if you look at you look at Republican Senate candidates in places like Michigan or Georgia or whatever it is. I mean, you don't see Democrats doing well with Senate candidates and House candidates in all these key battleground states with the Trump administration. The Trump campaign says there's been fraud, whether it's Pennsylvania, whether it's Michigan, whether it's Nevada or Arizona. The Democrats lost some key races there. So it just seems strange that there would be this massive conspiracy to help Joe Biden, but it wouldn't translate down ballot races.
Well, I think that's a great point that you're making, but I don't agree that there isn't down ballot potential fraud. I understand that many Republican congressional seats went to the person that they didn't think it was going to go to the Republican. It's the exact opposite of what the Democrats predicted and what they wanted. That said, that's just in a congressional race. In the Senate races, for example, in Georgia, we're seeing runoffs in both of them, that the Republican candidates there, oddly enough, didn't get the number of votes that people thought that they would have. So now I want to put that to the side. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that there is a difference, that the down ballot candidates got a higher number than Trump did. Well, there's a lot of reasons why that fraud could weigh in favor of just Trump and not in favor of them. When I say favor, I simply mean that fraud is happening against Trump and not against them. Number one, the motivation is to get Trump out of office. So if you're looking at things, if software was fixed, not just an error, but fixed, that error was in favor of Trump. When you're hearing about these ballots coming in, I heard Sidney Powell speak earlier today, a top lawyer, 450,000 ballots that were just marked for Joe Biden and not for any other candidate. The poll watchers that may be committing fraud, they're doing it just against Trump. These people probably have no idea who these other candidates are. They know, everybody knows who Donald Trump is. If you go down each potential item of fraud, you can see an avenue of how that fraud can be perpetrated just against Trump and not the other candidates. All that said, I do think that there are instances in the Senate, in the statewide cases, where there is down ballot fraud.
Potential.
Some of this has been the subject of lawsuits in Georgia. There was an effort by the Trump campaign to disqualify 53 ballots because a poll watcher in one county reported seeing a stack of late ballots that may have arrived after 7 p.m. A Superior Court judge rejected that suit after hearing testimony that, in fact, the ballots were received by 7 p.m. on that day. That's the only lawsuit in Georgia. In Arizona, where, of course, Fox News and the Associated Press declared that Biden won the state, there was a Republican National Committee lawsuit alleging that voters' ballots had been rejected because they contained bleeds, splotches, and stray marks. But then the petitioners, the RNC, then suddenly withdrew that lawsuit. In Nevada, there was a lawsuit to try to impose an injunction on the automated signature verification machines used in Clark County. As ballots continue to be counted, a federal judge rejected that request, saying that federal judges should not be involved in state election administration, and there's no evidence Clark County is doing anything unlawful. And then in Pennsylvania, there was also a lawsuit dismissed because, well, actually, the Trump campaign won a lawsuit because they asked that their observers be able to be within 6 feet of the counting of the ballots, and the judge said, yeah, that's fair. So they were. And they were within 6 feet. But again, none of those people who were within 6 feet have produced any evidence that they actually saw anything fraudulent.
Okay. There's a lot of different points there. Obviously, there's a lot of validity to what you're saying, that in small instances, in particular cases, nothing's getting overturned because there were 53 absentee ballots that were faulty in one manner, or there was one poll worker that wasn't able to watch, or even 3 or 4 or 5 poll workers that weren't able to watch for 4 hours over 8 different states. None of those things are going to overturn this election, and surely that's a valid point. The fact that individual lower court judges have dismissed these cases mean absolutely nothing to me, because all of these cases that have any degree of validity are going to end up at the United States Supreme Court. Make no mistake about this. The United States Supreme Court will be deciding this election. It's par for the course that cases first go to a lower court judge. Lower court judge upholds it, doesn't necessarily mean anything. They might be somebody who happens to have a political bent, although judges aren't supposed to be political. Let's get real here. All judges have a political bent inside themselves. You can't disassociate yourself from your political and moral values. If the judge goes the other way and is a liberal judge, maybe that judge is voting that, making a decision that way because that judge has a bias. Maybe the judge really believes it. You know, some judges are good, some judges aren't, in either direction. All this is irrelevant because we don't know what the totality of the evidence is at this point. I don't know. So I can't say anything except that if these allegations in their cumulative are true, this election is getting overturned. If even a significant portion of these cases in their aggregate are true, of all those different types of fraud that I read out, this election is getting overturned.
But wouldn't all of this proof have to come forward before December the 8th, which is the safe harbor provision for, which is, you know, in federal law that the states certify by December the 8th, which is 6 days before the electors meet in the states and actually choose. So there's essentially there's a clock on all of this, right? No,
there's a clock on when you can initiate a lawsuit. It's like a statute of limitations, David. You know, every type of alleged crime or every type of alleged tort in civil law has some form of statute of limitations on, or a breach of contract, right? So here, there's a time period that you have to initiate, let's just call it some type of lawsuit, a legal action. And that time frame is indeed very short. Proving the case, that's up to the courts for them to make a decision. We'd all like a quote, speedy trial in this matter. Everybody in the country wants a speedy trial in this matter. And I certainly assume that the courts will push this through at the fastest level possible. When you present your evidence in any given case is over a discovery time period. So you have to initiate the lawsuit first, or legal action, and then you present your evidence. I'm seeing things that if they're true, and I don't know if they're true or not, if they're true, just for example, if there really were 138,000 ballots in the state of Michigan that all came in under Joe Biden's name in a row, that is statistically impossible. That is concrete evidence of fraud.
There, you couldn't have 1,000 ballots come in that are all for one candidate.
We don't know if that allegation, the 138,000, is true. I think there's a claim about it. The officials in Michigan have denied it. They have said that, sure, there were some, mail-in ballots or early ballots, and we processed Detroit late, and Detroit obviously gave Joe Biden a lead by, several. I mean, his margins in the city of Detroit were, hundreds of thousands of votes, and we saw that playing out on election night. But again, there's got to be somebody who can come forward and say, here's the eyewitness, here's the whistleblower, here is the proof that 135,000 ballots came in that all favored Joe Biden.
We can agree that I don't know whether or not that is true. I know that it's been reported. I also know that it was reported in another one of the swing states, and I don't recall which one it is off the top of my head, that approximately 25,000 ballots all came in a row just for Joe Biden. That is also statistically impossible. And if it is true, that election will surely be overturned as well, because it's prima facie evidence of significant fraud. Now, the 138,000 one, that would probably wipe out the vote total, where if it is true, you don't have to have a re-election. It would just swing that state in favor of Donald Trump. If you don't have something that's that stark, David, if you have something that's just like, 3,400 ballots in Nevada, for example, which a lawsuit was just filed on, that the people were either dead or they were from out of state, they had moved. Will that swing the election? No. You're going to need that plus some of the other levels of fraud just on pure numbers for a judge to say, now I'm overturning the election results and making a ruling that's in favor of Donald Trump. Which takes us into the question of what is the remediation? What if there is this fraud? How legally do the courts handle it? Well, one is what I just said, is that the judge just simply overturns the numbers in favor of Joe Biden to Donald Trump. The other, though, what if that, David, something's innocuous, like the poll workers, right? Let's say, for argument's sake, again, I don't know if this is true. I know that it seems pretty credible based on what I'm hearing, but the courts will decide it. But let's just say, for example, in Pennsylvania, there were 1 million votes that were counted without Republican poll watchers overseeing it. Can a judge say, well, that's prima facie evidence that 1 million votes went in favor of Joe Biden? No, that's not fair to Joe Biden. But what the judge can say is that although we're not going to overrule the election in Pennsylvania in favor of Trump instead of Biden, they can order a new election. I have a whole list of matters where everything from congressional races down to mayor races where courts have ordered new elections.
We're talking with Kenneth Vecchio. He's a former judge. He's a longtime defense lawyer, prosecutor. He does entertainment law. He's also contributing to Quick Hits News with his legal experience. And Ken, let's just take for the example that's out there. And again, we're positing we don't know. For example, the story about 138,000 ballots all showing up for Joe Biden. There are claims, there are counterclaims, but in terms of investigating that, I mean, what has to happen? How does, who has standing to bring that kind of case, say in Michigan? Where does it go? And how would a court try to resolve this?
These are all standard legal questions for every case that just become hyper important because it's a presidential election. So it's a great question. Who has standing? Unfortunately, a lot of people don't even understand what the concept is of standing. You obviously do. I'll try to break it down without legalese. Standing just simply means who has the legal right to bring a claim. If somebody punches me in the face and knocks out 4 of my teeth, which is nearly impossible because I bench press over 400 pounds, but let's just say argumentatively that something that ridiculous could happen. I'm the only person that has standing to bring that case because I'm the only injured or aggrieved party. The woman that's standing next to me that's not punched, she has no standing. So here, it isn't really like that. Except for Donald Trump. Donald Trump has standing, but there are other people who have standing. An aggrieved party, guess what, is any voter. Any voter could bring that case.
So let's suppose any voter does bring the case. What level court in the state of Michigan would they go in federal court? And then what does the court do?
It should go in federal court. There's an argument that the case could be brought in state court because states are overseeing the elections. Because it's a federal election,
In my opinion, federal court is the better and more appropriate venue for it. But it's going to go to that lower court first. Nothing can, if your question is, can something just automatically go to the Supreme Court? The answer is in 99.99+% of the cases, no. But there are certain cases where the U.S. Supreme Court will come in and say, we'll be the first court of jurisdiction. That's not happening right now. Right now, all these cases are being brought at the lower level. That Pennsylvania case, which I'm sure you're going to want to get into, because that's a square legal question as opposed to all the factual things that we're talking about right now. A case like that, and any of these cases, quite honestly, could be a case of first impression or first jurisdiction at the United States.
I do want to talk about Pennsylvania in just a moment. And by the way, for people who want to ask questions, we're taking your questions over Facebook and Twitter and our social media channels. But again, so let's just play out the Michigan scenario first. It goes to a federal district judge, one would assume. Somebody, a voter or an aggrieved party, brings it and says, okay, there's allegations that 135,000, 138,000, whatever it is, the ballots all favored Joe Biden. That's statistically impossible. What does the judge then need to hear from the petitioner, from the respondent, in order to consider this?
Well, the judge is first going to look at, very simply, law school 101. Is there an actual cause of action? If this is true, can I make a decision on changing the election results? Obviously, in this case, the judge can, if it's true. Then the judge is going to want
to. In order to determine if it's true, would they have to say, okay, produce that entire batch of 138,000 ballots and let me look at it? In other words, there has to be somebody who comes in and says, yes, here's the data from the state that shows, a sudden group of ballots and they all had one name on it.
Correct. They're going to go from legal issues like summary judgment. Summary judgment means we knock out a case because even if you prove everything, even if everything you say is true, it doesn't make out a cause of action. It doesn't make out a case in non-legal terms, right? So say we've passed that, and we will pass that with this matter that you're describing. Then the judge is going to want to look at evidence. What's the evidence here? Is it going to be that simple that they can just go out and find those 138,000 ballots? Well, if there is 138,000 ballots that were the case, I don't know. I don't know if those ballots got integrated with the other 7 million ballots or so in Michigan. So they have to do what is called really not a recount, but an audit. They're going to have to go through every single ballot and see if they can find those ballots. There's other examples where the same exact thing is the case. Have you heard about the argument that all of these ballots have been marked with a watermark? I don't know if that's true.
Right. It's been debunked in part because the theory was that all of these ballots had a Department of Homeland Security watermark, which the DHS doesn't do that. They don't put watermarks on the ballots. And so I'm not quite sure, is it, that there's a safety that these ballots have watermarks to prevent fraud? And if so, which states have the watermarks? That seems a bit murky. But take us to the Pennsylvania case that you were referring to a moment ago. What jumps out and why?
Okay, that's a square legal issue. These other ones we're talking about factual issues. So I'm going to jump on the watermark for just 30 seconds. Then I'll go straight to Pennsylvania. If, I'm going to keep using the word if, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear if, but if it is the case that there really were watermarks on all these ballots, well, that's going to be an easy one. And if they find a whole bunch of ballots without watermarks, they're getting thrown out, and the case and the election will get overturned without the need of a re-election, and Donald Trump will become president. That's a factual matter. And I wanted to use that to segue into Pennsylvania is a square legal issue at its forefront. I'm talking about the main issue that everybody keeps hearing about. Here's the legal issue in simple terms. The United States Constitution provides that it's only the state legislatures of each state who can determine when ballots can be received, how they can be counted, and all of those legal technicalities regarding the receipt of ballots. In Pennsylvania, certain people, the Democrats, wanted to change the law from that for ballots to be counted, they had to be received by 8 p.m. election night. That was the longstanding law. They wanted to change the law because they felt in their, I hope in good faith, they felt that they wanted to give people more time because of reasons related to the pandemic hysteria. And they wanted it to be 3 days after 8 p.m. on election night that ballots could come in and be counted. Okay? The legislature wouldn't go for it. So they brought the case to the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania ruled that now you can have ballots be received for 3 days after 8 p.m. on election night.
Mm-hmm.
They were sued. The United States Supreme Court handed down 2 decisions. One, they were asked to stay the imposition of that law. Stay means stop it until you decide, until the Supreme Court decides whether or not this law is valid. The Supreme Court said, no, we will not stay the imposition of the law. Then they came back and they asked them to rule on it now. The first decision was 4-4, an equal tie. Okay. Amy Coney Barrett wasn't on the Supreme Court at that point. The second case, they said, well, hear the case on its merits then. The Supreme Court said no, 8-0, because we don't have enough time. It was either 8-0 or 9-0. Barrett may have been on at that point. They said, we just don't have enough time, but we'll rule on it later. Now this case is coming back to them to rule on. Whether that was a good decision or not is debatable. They felt we'll decide it afterwards. Maybe they were crossing their fingers, hoping this gets punted and it doesn't matter because it becomes irrelevant. Okay. It's not irrelevant. Now, David, they have to decide it. The state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania definitively will be overruled by this particular Supreme Court. Why? Because these Supreme Court members in the majority are what are known as constitutional contextualists. They're going to decide things on the basis of how the Constitution literally reads. And the Constitution literally reads that only the state legislature can decide this. The Supreme Court has no legal authority to make this decision, and that case is going to get tossed. Now, does that change the results of the election?
I thought that Judge Alito had already requested what Pennsylvania was already doing, that Pennsylvania was already separating out those ballots that came in after Election Day. In other words, Alito said, make sure you separate them out just so that we have some numbers and whatnot, and Pennsylvania was doing that. And then the question becomes, okay, are there enough ballots that arrived after Election Day that would make up the, whatever is 40,000 vote difference that Joe Biden has in terms of the lead over Donald Trump? But it may well be the case. Let's for argument's sake, let's suppose that 200,000 ballots came in after Election Day. Then sure, there may be something there, but we don't know yet whether in fact that's the case, that many ballots came in after Election Day.
Yeah, you're correct on everything you said. There's a couple prongs to your points that you just made. The first is that yes, Justice Alito did say to separate them. It's my understanding that Pennsylvania was ignoring his initial order and wasn't separating them in some of the counties. He reinstituted the order, made it stronger, and it's my understanding that they now have separated them. So that's great that they separated them, but it appears that they've been counted in favor of Biden for votes that came in favor of Biden, and counted in favor of Trump for votes that came in favor of Trump. It appears that many more of these ballots were in favor of Biden. So let's say, for argument's sake, there were 60,000 ballots that came in and 45,000 were votes for Biden. Well, those 45,000 are going to get thrown out. And if that makes the difference, where Trump now has more votes than Biden, the United States Supreme Court doesn't need to do anything further. They're just going to rule that those ballots are thrown out, and then Trump will all of a sudden be the winner of Pennsylvania. Again, if that's the case. It looks to me.
But then to take it a step further, let's just for argument's sake, if he wins Pennsylvania, that doesn't really matter right now in the Electoral College because Biden has already won Nevada and Arizona. So in other words, Biden is sitting on 270 without Pennsylvania. And then, of course, there's the question about Georgia. So it feels, though, like there's a lot of these dominoes that have to fall Trump's way in terms of lawsuits, investigations, and state after state, that it's not just the case as it was in 2000, where we were a 537 vote difference in Florida and was only up to Florida to determine who was the winner. In this particular, election, we've got at least 3 or 4 states where things have to go Donald Trump's way in order for him to get within the Electoral College vote that he needs.
Correct. So breaking it down, Trump would need to have Pennsylvania overturned, Georgia overturned, and then one of any of the following states: Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, or Nevada. Any one of those would lead to path to victory for him mathematically. So that means that, yes, it's correct that he would have to have more than just Pennsylvania overturned. There's a couple differences here, though, than Florida back in 2000. One is that there's an incredible amount of craze going on in the United States that I've never seen before, and I can't think of anything in the history of the United States, minus when Abraham Lincoln was president, that people are not going to have it either way. People are emphatic about this matter in either direction. So it's not going to go away so easily like it did back in 2000, hanging their hat on the 540 votes or so in Florida. Each state will be evaluated, and there's enough potential fraud here that multiple states can get changed in their results by pure legal rulings, either by, again, the court saying that the numbers are different than what was originally presented. So we're changing in layman's terms, we're just changing the winner to Donald Trump in a particular state, to the court ordering a brand new election. So like the poll workers one,
it wouldn't be as simple though for the Supreme Court to just say, okay, we're going to award it to, I mean, there have to be a slate of electors that meet according to the Constitution in each state on December the 14th this year. And those electors vote and choose. And then they come to Washington, whatever it was, a week later, 2 weeks later, they come to Washington, and in the well of the Senate, in front of the president of the Senate, they present their sort of numbers. So that's, for example, for people who remember back in 2000, there were a lot of people who supported Al Gore who were upset that he conceded, and they walked out of the Capitol when the electors presented themselves, and the House and the Senate counted them up and said, okay, George W. Bush is the winner. Something would have to happen to change those slates of electors before December 14th, when they first meet in the states, to figure out which way they're going to go. And then certainly, if they don't catch it by then, they've got to catch it by the time they come to Congress and present themselves or present the certificates.
Well, what you're identifying is there's a couple different paths of how the election results could change. Certainly, right now, and this will help explain it. Joe Biden is not the president-elect, like so many people in the media are saying, and so many people on social media are saying. He is somebody who is just a candidate still, who the media has anointed as the winner based on unofficial results. There's canvassing of the votes that happens afterwards. There's recounts that are going to happen naturally. And then the state has to certify the winner, and then it goes to the Electoral College. And then through any of those processes, this could get overturned without court intervention. I do not expect that this election will be overturned in any particular state, much less in its totality, based on any of those scenarios, but they could be. Through the courts, though, simultaneously, there will be legal actions that are occurring and investigations by the Attorney General's office that could result through other avenues of this election being overturned. But here, take this case. In North Carolina in 2018, in the 9th Congressional District, a new election was ordered after evidence of absentee fraud emerged. About 61% of all the mail-in votes were cast for a Republican candidate, a guy named Mark Harris, over the Democrat Don McCready. And that was in face of that only 16% of the actual mail-in ballots that were requested were by Republicans. So the Republican guy got 61% of the mail-in votes, but only 16% were requested by Republicans. The judges there said, it just doesn't make sense, and this was in favor of the Democrat. And the judge was right. The judge ordered a new election. So the Harris drops out or gets kicked out. Another Republican comes in, and guess what? The Republican wins on his merits. But the point is they ordered a new election just because of a 61% versus 16% difference in mail-in votes that came in versus what were requested by Republicans. So if that's the case, if there were a million ballots not watched by poll watchers in Pennsylvania, the court may order a new election just for that reason alone in Pennsylvania.
You mentioned that it's going to be very difficult for either side to accept, for the Trump supporters to accept Joe Biden as president, for the Democrats to accept if any of this gets overturned. So where do we go as a country? And granted that we can't go back, I suppose, you and I have talked before. We have our disagreements, but the one thing you and I have both agreed on in the past is that we need a fundamental reform of our election system. We need more uniformity across the states, across the counties, both in terms of how ballots are cast and counted and protocols, but there's no time to do that. So in terms of this particular election, and maybe that's something that happens before, the midterms in 2022 or the next presidential in 2024, how does the country move beyond this, regardless of what the outcome is over the next 4 or 5 weeks?
Look, I obviously have the candidate who I would like to see in office, and I'm unequivocal in my position on that. That said, if Donald Trump wins on his merits by vote recounts and by the courts examining evidence, well, because he's the guy I'd like to see in office, I'm elated. I'm also elated, though, because that's the right result. On the other hand, I don't want to see Joe Biden become president. You probably do. We have, we have our differences. I'm not saying me and you. Us as a nation, as varied peoples, have our differences on who we'd like as a candidate. If Joe Biden, after court scrutiny, wins this election, then he should be the president of the United States. I believe that he should be. And I think everybody should believe that he should be if again, he really has won this election on his merits. And that is a very simple explanation of that we all need to accept the results. I don't think it's fair to say we should just accept the results of what the media is reporting and what the different boards of elections in different states are saying. I don't trust them. Just like I said weeks ago on a show with you, I don't trust the people who take polls. And I was 100% correct before the election when I said, I don't believe that these polls are anywhere near accurate, and they turned out not to be. I don't believe that these election results are near accurate based on the evidence I'm hearing. I'm not convinced, though. I'm not convinced because, like you, I haven't seen all the evidence. I feel very strongly that there's a very likely result that certain states will get overturned or that new elections will be ordered in them, because it appears that the evidence is overwhelming with several different types of fraud, and there can't be that many mistakes in these lawsuits and that many mistakes that evidence exists. But we're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, and look, to your point, I mean, look, who knows if the accusations are true or not? But one of the things that I've said to, a lot of my friends who are concerned about the way this may play out is to me, I mean, there is validity. If Donald Trump's campaign has evidence, or if his supporters have evidence, bring it forward in front of a federal judge and let's air it out and let's see what it is, and let's let the judge apply the law and examine the evidence. And if the evidence is there and it's clear and convincing and it meets certain thresholds, then okay, the judge will see that, and the rest of us will too. If these are spurious accusations and they're just sort of, conspiracy theories or whatever people are coming up with on the internet to sort of claim this stuff, that will also come out if there's nothing there, if it's presented in court. So I guess to sort of answer the question that I said to you as I hear you talking, I mean, perhaps the one way that the country does somehow become unified is that the courts take a very thorough look at this, and somebody's going to be exonerated or not. And after the courts have had their say, then okay, then then the media can say whatever it wants. The electors do what they're supposed to do. But there certainly is time, I think, over the next 3 or 4 weeks for people who have evidence, if evidence exists, bring it forward, put it under the spotlight of a federal court, let everybody see what it is, let a judge see what it is, let the judge ask all the right questions. And if there's evidence there, there's evidence there. If there's not evidence there, then the judges will rule that way. And at least that way, I think we get some closure.
In my legal opinion, and as my opinion as an American citizen, that is summarized perfectly. If I'm on either side of this election, if I'm Donald Trump or I'm Joe Biden, I want it to go into the courts. Because the evidence will surely necessarily be presented. And if it's there and Donald Trump has been defrauded, then this election will get overturned. And if it's not, we will see that. And then Joe Biden will be president, and then everybody needs to shut up.
And in the meantime, would you then support, because obviously we may not have rulings or court decisions on this for several weeks, would you support the Trump administration going ahead and giving money to the Biden campaign to start their transition on the chance that the rulings are in his favor and he is sworn in as president on January 20th? It would certainly be good for the country if there is a new administration that's coming in, if they have time to start doing background checks and vetting their nominees and getting ready.
I would not support in any way, shape, or manner considering Joe Biden to be the president-elect at this point, because I think it's fundamentally unjust for there to be any kind of anointing in any legal manner whatsoever, given that there's so much.
I'm not talking about anointing. I'm just saying, okay, yeah, you can have some office space in D.C. and yes, here's some money to run background checks on the people who may serve in your administration should you in fact become president.
On that square point, I agree with you. I don't see any harm. I do not see any harm in doing that.
Victory for Schuster! I got him to change his mind. Ken, this has been so interesting. As I've said before, you and I often disagree, but every time I talk to you, I learn something. I learned something about the process, and I think it's enlightening to a lot of people, regardless of whether they agree with you or not, or agree with me or not. I think people come out of these conversations always knowing more about it, and so it's been fascinating talking with you, and we appreciate you doing this. And our thanks to everybody who's been watching up and down the line through Quick Hits News, through our social media channels. Ken Del Vecchio, Ken, great stuff as always, and thank you. We appreciate it.
Hey, thank you too. It was a great conversation, and everybody gets enlightened by having conversations like this where they're balanced, and I learned quite a bit myself. So thanks again.
Excellent. Thanks, Ken. I appreciate everybody. Thanks for watching.